I'm going to introduce Jim, who's already introduced himself. I've known Jim for at least 20 years. I think I knew of Jim longer than that. Everybody's known of Jim for a long time. But I think I met him first face-to-face 20 years ago, probably the spring of 2003. Anyway, I've been impressed over the years with how his messages and my messages kind of come together. This is our third sale together this year, season. Yeah. And we've had some of these talks together in our spare time. And, you know, I have a big fear that family farms and ranches are going to struggle to stay in business. You know, the cost of inputs keep going up. We keep doing things the same way we were doing them 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. It's not going to work. And I think that's been my message. Everybody here is receiving my emails, newsletters. That's been Jim's message about the same amount of time. And that's one of the reasons Jim's here, is because he says, I don't want to do this anymore. He enjoys doing this. He just gets tired of being overbooked. But he says, I believe in your program, I believe in your cause, your mission. He says, I'm in. And so that's why we have him here. And pay attention. I think it's going to be worth your time tonight.
Thank you very much. This is a tough talk to give to a bunch of ranchers the night before a bull sale. So there's 7 things I've learned about profitable ranching over the last 45 years. There's actually more than that, but I only put 7 in here. And here's the first one, and this is the heartbreaker for a lot of people. Ranching is a land-based business. The livestock are only incidental. And I'm going to explain why I believe that and why we need to be focused on the productivity and performance of the land more than the animals. One of the big drivers of profitability in ranching is actually what is the carrying capacity of your property. Now, carrying capacity is the ability, the capability of your ranch to produce feed. It's the supply side of the supply and demand equation. Stocking rate is the number of animals that we put out there on that grazing unit. It's our measure of demand. And one of the very fundamental guidelines of grazing management is do not allow stocking rate to exceed carrying capacity. I'm going to talk a little about that a little bit, why it's very often said stocking rate's a prime driver of profitability. And it's really very simple. The more animals that you can carry on the place, the greater the revenue stream is going to be. So it's in our best interest to carry as many animals as we can. But stocking rate also is the primary determinant of individual animal performance. I'll give you this example. We got 40 acres. We put 1 steer out there. You know, that steer can pretty well go around and pick the best quality feed, take big bites of feed, and that steer is going to gain real well, isn't he? We might put 2 steers out there, and they're both going to do pretty good. But we get to a point where they start being competitive with one another. There's not enough feed to go around for everybody. So as a general principle, as stocking rate goes up, individual performance will decline. And that is especially true if we allow stocking rate to exceed carrying capacity. So this relationship between stocking rate and carrying capacity is very commonly expressed with these 2 curves, and they're called the Mott curves because Gerald Mott, an American pasture scientist who worked kind of from the 1940s up till the late 80s, you know, he drew this out. And on the bottom axis here, we have increasing stocking rate. On the vertical axis, we have performance. And we have 2 lines there. The red line is individual animal performance. The green line is gain per acre or production per acre. And any of you who have been following Kit's program for any amount of time, time after time again, either in the discussion forum or in the newsletter or in his updates, he makes the point that we need to be focused on production per acre, not production per animal. Now, when Mott drew these out, all right, so come back to what I said. So on the red line, you know, I said we could put one steer out there and he's going to gain real well. We might put 2 steers out there and they're both going to gain real well. But we start putting additional ones out there and the rate of gain goes down. As long as each animal we put out there gains the same, the gain per acre goes up linearly. When the animals start becoming competitive and their individual performance starts to fall off, the rate of increase in gain per acre begins to fall off. Now, Mott, he put an arrow on that graph and said where those 2 lines intersect is the point of optimum grazing. Well, Mott was an agronomist, not an economist, and Mott was wrong. Mott was wrong. Where actual optimization of profitability occurs is just before we reach the peak in gain per acre. If you draw a line out there, what that shows is we can give up more individual animal performance than we might believe. And as that individual performance starts to go down, at some point, gain per acre also goes down. And when you have individual animal performance going down, gain per acre going down, that is the situation of being overstocked, and there is zero opportunity to make profit. So it's very important that we balance the number of animals we put out there to the capacity of the land. Taking this a little further, in my view, and I think Kit would share this, it is our obsession with high individual performance, the biggest weaning weight, the biggest cow, high milk production, the fastest gaining steer. It's our obsession with that that actually limits our opportunity for profitability. High individual performance will almost always cost you more money. So as you push for bigger weaning weights, it's going to cost you more to get there. As you push for the highest possible steer gain, it's going to cost you money to get there. As you push for a 98% conception rate, it's going to cost you money to get there. There is an optimum level of all of these performance factors that will deliver us the highest level of profitability. I heard Kit say this a long, long time ago, and it is still very true, and I don't know if this is ever going to change unless the whole market structure, the whole pricing structure changes. A herd of smaller cows will always produce more pounds of calf per acre that are worth more per pound than what a herd of larger cows on the same acreage will do. Why is that? The reason is, if we look at all the costs associated with our ranching business and divide them into land-based costs versus animal-based costs, I mean, you look at that list there: land, land lease, property taxes, seeding, fertilization, irrigation, weed control, seeding, fence, water, all of those things we are applying to the land. That equipment we own. What do you actually do with a cow, with a tractor and some kind of piece of equipment behind it? Do you plow a cow? Do you mow a cow? Do you bale a cow? No. Everything we do with equipment, other than taking the backhoe to dig a hole to bury a dead cow, everything we do with equipment is done to the land, not the cow. You add all of this stuff up, then on the other side, add up the value of your livestock, the costs that are directly associated with the animals, trucking, veterinary costs, identification, stuff like that. What we find is that the land-based assets are going to be 3 to 5 times as many dollars as our animal assets. So if we think about profit in the terms of something like return on assets or return on investment, we better be paying attention to where most of our money is invested. And that is land-based assets. We don't need to get more out of every cow. We need to get more out of every acre. Oh my God, we're ranchers, we're not farmers. But you know what? Ranching is a land-based business. We got to get more out of our acres rather than thinking so much about how do I get more and more and more out of an individual cow. How many of you have heard of Burke-Teichert? Several. How many of you have heard of Deseret ranches? Several more, quite a few more. So Burke was the VP for operations for the entire Deseret ranch system. He came up through the ranks, through primarily the ranches in Nebraska, but then he became overseer of everything. And you know, if you look at all the Deseret ranches all across the U.S. and in Canada, we're talking about millions of acres and tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands head of cattle. Before Burke was CEO, a lot of the Deseret ranches were actually losing money. After he was done, pretty well the whole system was making money. Burke-Teichert knows a lot about how you create profitability in the ranching business. One of the last articles, you know, he wrote, for years he wrote a regular column in Beef magazine. And one of the last columns that he wrote featured his 7 keys to profitability. We're going to go down and look through those. First one, carrying capacity. And he emphasizes it is production per acre, not production per animal, that matters. Grazed feed versus fed feed. How many days of the year are your livestock grazing? How many days are they eating stored feed? The goal at Deseret pretty well is 365 days a year grazing. Do they always achieve that? No. But their realistic target is no more than 15% of the year do you feed hay. So that's about 70 days, I believe. If you're feeding hay more than that, very tough to be profitable. Dallas Mount at Ranching for Profit, I was talking to him earlier this year, and one of the benchmarks they use is 60 days. If you feed hay more than 60 days, the likelihood of you being profitable goes down dramatically. So we emphasize grazed feed versus fed feed. Cows per person, FT or AU per FTE, animal units per full-time employee. If I was just about exactly a year ago, I spoke at the Kentucky Grazing Conference, and you know, Kentucky, that's way on the wet side of the country, a long ways away from here. Some of you may not know it, Kentucky has the highest beef cow density per square mile of any state. I'm pretty sure Kentucky is higher on the list for total beef cows than is the state of Montana. They're packed in there. I asked at this conference of the state cow-calf extension specialist, how many cows should a mom-pop operation be able to handle without any help? He said 200 to 300. If I ask that same question, I don't know who the cow-calf extension specialist in Montana is, but if I asked him that question, him or her, that question, I suspect the answer would be something like, well, 500 to 600, maybe 700 if you've got everything right. The standard at Deseret is 1,000 cows per FTE. says 800 to 1,200 there, so it depends on the individual ranch, but that's their expectation. 1,000 head per employee. In Australia, the national standard is 1,500 cows per employee. On the best run ranches in Australia, their target is 3,000 cows per employee. Is an Australian that much better than an American when it comes to running cattle? No. You know what the difference is? It's a different business model. We still have Bessie and Elsie and Olga, and we see a cow having difficulty having a calf, we go and help, and we pull the calf, and we get the calf up to nurse. You know what the Australians' name for a cow is? That cow over there. What's their idea of assisting a cow having a difficult birth? Bam! And you're right on. They are simply production units and nothing else. Should we go that way? No, I'm not advocating that. But in my view, it is not your job, it's not my job to be out there babysitting cows, pulling calves out of them, getting them up to nurse. That is the cow's job. Increased gross margin. So this is a financial measure. Gross margin is the difference between the value of your product and the operating cost needed to produce it. Okay? And we strive for that to be greater than 50%. Reduce overheads, salaries, equipment and facility depreciation, utilities, all of those things that whether we're raising 100 cows or 1,000 cows are basically the same. We want to get those overheads down to 33%. Do we want that to be 33% of the value of our product when we are at the peak of cattle prices, or do we want to be that when we're in the trough of the cattle cycle? You better plan to be at that level when you're in the bottom of the cattle cycle, so that you can survive the worst that the economy is going to throw at you. And then, when we do have a good price, you do very well. The debt-equity ratio. And this is all about your personal level of risk aversion. Some people are very good, and they sleep well at night, being in debt, knowing that they're leveraging their limited amount of their limited amount of money to make their future much better and brighter. Some people don't like to be in debt at all, and so they're unwilling to go out in that risk because they might not sleep at night, they might become unpleasant people, whatever. And then we have the scale of operations factors. And yes, there is an economic benefit to operating at a larger scale, but only up to a point. Now, what Burke had to say about that was, if you have the top 6 right, small operations can be profitable. 100 cows, is that a money loser just because it's too small of a deal? Not if you have the right business model. Does 10,000 cows guarantee you that you're going to be profitable? Not if you got a lousy business model. So it isn't so much simply about scale of operations as having those first 6 right. Now, look at that list. Is there anything in Burke's 7 keys to profitability that is related to individual animal performance? It is land use efficiency, labor efficiency, and capital management. I'm sorry, but as much as we love cows, as much as we love the day-to-day work, as much as you might love being in the saddle, that's probably not what's going to determine the profitability of your business. It's all these other factors: land, labor, capital. Now, I've just said that cattle are just incidental to ranching. Well, they're not the most important piece of ranching, but they are an important piece. But we do not need to have the biggest cow, the highest milking cow, the biggest weaning weight. What we need is functionality, and primarily female functionality. Things we're looking for in a functional animal, and I can see that the aspect on this screen is not correct, because that cow up there on the top, and I know that cow, I've met that cow personally, she ain't that long. She's really a nice, deep, proportional cattle the way it should be. But we talk about small to moderate frame size, deep body, easy fleshing, fast to shed the winter coat, natural fertility, natural pest resistance, longevity, good temperament. That is what makes functional cows. And now, since I did my advertisement at the beginning, that's Kit's story for years and years and years. This is what they are focused on, is functional cattle. So what we really want is good land use efficiency, labor effectiveness, capital management, and let's do it with functional cattle. Number two, you can never have too much grass or money, but it's easy to have too many cattle. So that's what I learned from Bud Williams. Bud talks about you have 3 inventories to manage: feed, capital, livestock. You can never have too much feed, you can never have too much capital, but it's easy to have too many livestock. So if you are stocked so that your stocking rate is at least equal to, but preferably a little bit under your carrying capacity, you have opportunities. If the good year rolls around and you get some rain and you get some extra grass, you got things you can do. If you are always chasing grass, it's very, very difficult to be profitable. You never have an opportunity to capitalize on something good happening. You're just trying to survive this ongoing bad scene of too many cattle on the place. You have extra capital, the opportunity's right, you can buy more livestock. You can lease another place. If it makes sense to do so, you could buy in feed. You could simply go to Vegas. Overstock, too many animals. You look at that left-hand picture, what's the problem there? It's simply too many animals. That is a sprinkler irrigated pasture 5 miles down the valley from our place. Those people, we were only in the valley for, I took this the first couple of years we were there. I've been almost 20 years in Idaho now. That place changed hands about 5 years after we got there. Why? Because those people went broke. They went broke. And now it looks a lot more like the place on the right. That's the unit that I've managed for the last 18 years in Pahsimeroi Valley in Idaho. And the neighbors there, they were only producing 120 to 140 AUDs per acre, but they were overstocked. We generally produce 240. Our very best year was 318 AUDs per acre. And we always have grass. Where do you suppose the elk and the deer hang out in the wintertime? The ranch that's overstocked and going broke, or the ranch that's taking care of its resources? Unfortunately, the better job you do of your grazing management and range management, the more elk are going to come and live on you. Do not calve in the winter months. Number one, it's just not very much fun to do that. But number two is it costs a lot. So any breeding female has a very predictable nutritional cycle. When she's at peak lactation, it's very high. When she's dry, it's much lower. This particular graph here is a specific cow. And, you know, I've got 20 different graphs like this. Use them for different things. So what we're illustrating here is how the energy demand of the animal varies through the season. And we've got this calf being born in January, not because it's the right thing to do, because it's a whole lot easier to look at a calendar that starts with January and ends in December. So she calves January 1st, starts lactating, so her energy demand is going up because it takes a lot of energy to make milk. Dairy farmers really know this. A lot of beef cattle producers don't think about it nearly enough. So typically 40 to 70 days after lactation, she's going to be at peak lactation. And that is when she has her highest energy demand. What has to happen 83 days after this calf was born? She's got to get bred again if she's going to maintain a 365-day calving interval. 83 days is what we have to get that girl bred back. So her highest energy demand comes in the first 60 to 70, 80 days of lactation. Then, after she passes her peak, it starts to fall off. We're going to wean that calf August 1st, and that's when she's going to be at her lowest point. Now, this is a 1,300-pound moderate to superior milking ability cow. That difference from her low point in August to that peak 60 days after calving is a little over 80% increase in feed demand. If you had, in this scenario, you say, oh, I got 100 cows there in August, September, when she's not lactating. When she's at peak lactation, in essence, you have 180 cows on the place. And it costs more to feed 180 cows than it does 100. So what we want to do is get peak lactation and the breeding season matched up with when we have our best forage supply. So this graph here, on the bottom, we're looking at a year in 2-week intervals. On the vertical, we've got the daily intake requirement as a percent of the body weight. The blue bars are a cow calving January 1st. The orange bars are a cow calving May 15th. I guess it's January 15th, May 15th. You can see, and this is for low to moderate milking ability cows. So the difference from the lowest point to the highest point is only about 35%, not 80%. And in our book, that's the right kind of cow. You do not need 40 pounds of milk a day in a beef cow. And there are Gelbvieh cross cows, Simmental cross cows, other, what historically in Europe were dairy breed that we turned into beef breeds in this country, and it's 25, 35, 45 pounds of milk a day. You do not need that. You will notice that the highest point in those blue bars is higher than the highest point in the orange bars. You know why that is? It's a thing called winter. And in winter, they have a higher maintenance requirement. They need more feed just to stay warm. And so in the winter calving cow, we are having our highest feed volume demand and our highest quality demand in a time of year when typically we do not have green growing feed. With the May 15th calving cow, all of that peak lactation, getting bred, is happening when we have green growing grass, and green growing grass is almost always cheaper than stored feed. At the end of the year, the winter calving cow of comparable size and milking ability, she's going to have consumed about 1,500 pounds more of forage in that year than what her sister who was calving in May did. It is a big, big cost differential. You're also going to have more difficult births, more calves you have to go out and save if it's in the winter. So let's not calve in the winter. You need to calve in sync with your forage supply. Now, a lot of people say calve in sync with nature. I do not say calve in sync with nature. I say calve in sync with your forage supply. Now, a lot of you kind of live in nature because you're on native rangeland. If you are on native range, June calving is probably the optimal time, which is calving in sync with nature. That's when the elk, the deer, the bison, the antelope, they're all having their babies. And it's people who work in this environment who would say calve in sync with nature. Is a center pivot natural? No, it's not. It's an alteration of nature. So in central Idaho where we are, you know, I've for years kept records on our grazing, our pasture growth rates, our feed supply. And if I could have all my calves born on one day, it would be May 17th. May 17th is the date that would match the cow's lactation and breeding cycle perfectly with our feed supply. It makes May 17th a very busy day, but it would optimize that matchup of supply and demand. These next two aren't going to be relevant to people here, but they're illustrations. Down in southeast Texas, it's mostly a subtropical warm season grass environment, and that stuff typically is not very good quality. But if you plant something like annual ryegrass or oats or triticale in the fall of the year, the highest quality feed you're going to have is February, March, April from those winter annuals. This is a situation where actually calving in January could actually make sense. Now that's way out of sync with nature, but because people have changed nature by planting non-native, unnatural grasses there, they have altered their feed supply. In Missouri, in Arkansas, in Tennessee, Kentucky, Georgia, Alabama, eastern Oklahoma, a lot of places, we have a grass called tall fescue. And tall fescue has what's called an endophytic fungus growing in it that causes the plant to produce a alkaloid toxin, and it is most toxic May and June. It is least toxic in the winter. If your primary forage supply, and there's nothing better for grazing in the winter in that part of the country than tall fescue, that's how we in Missouri were able to graze 365 days of the year, was we had so much fescue. It makes perfect sense to fall calve there. Not in sync with nature, but in sync with the forage supply. This is remarkable, this one. 45 years, and I've learned this. Water makes grass grow. It's very simple. Those of you who've lived in the West all your life and you have rangeland and you have irrigation, you recognize this real easily. Water makes grass grow. I kind of was aware of that when I lived in Missouri, but I didn't appreciate it as much as I do now, having come to the West. This table here, and you don't need to be able to read. Hopefully some of your people's eyes are good enough you can actually read that. You know, I can't anymore. But what it's saying on the, on the far left-hand column, it's the precipitation amount that you receive, or the irrigation water you apply. The next column is the pounds of dry matter forage we expect to be produced from each inch of water we have available. And the interesting thing about this is, as you add more water into the environment, each inch of water actually generates more forage growth. Well, that's pretty cool. So it's like the rich getting richer. Each additional inch of water builds on what the previous inch grew, and so our yield goes up. And I'm not going to go into the rest of it. The point I want to make here is in your grazing management choices, whether we're on rangeland or we're on irrigated pasture or we're back east in a high rainfall environment, it isn't the amount of precipitation that falls. It isn't the amount of irrigation water that you apply. It is how much of that water actually gets into the soil and is stored in the soil. That's what determines the productivity. You know, there's places back east where they get 40 inches of rain, but the soil is badly degraded and compacted, and their production level is more reflective of only 15 to 20 inches of rain because they're not effectively capturing it. Guess what? Irrigation can be the same way. Whether we're talking about flood irrigation or sprinklers, if you are not managing your water in an effective way, you might be putting on 35 inches of water in the year, but only getting the benefit of 15 or 20. If we did a more effective job of managing that water, we'd get a lot more out of what we're paying to put that irrigation water out there. I think almost everybody who lives in the West is familiar with the term evapotranspiration. In Alabama, where Kit and I were a week ago, what's that? So evapotranspiration, just to refresh your memory, evaporation is the loss of water from the soil surface, just like losing it out of a pond or a puddle in the middle of the road. It evaporates away. Evaporation does not grow cow food. Transpiration is the metabolic use of water by the plant. It is transpiration that grows cow food. When we have green growing plants out there, good strong cover, we keep the soil cooler, we have very little evaporative water loss. That leaves us plenty of water available for plant metabolism and growing seed. When we have the landscape dry out and we get more and more bare ground spots out there, most of the water ends up being lost just directly to evaporation, which means we have very little left to support plant growth. So it becomes very important in our management to try to get more water into the soil and hold it there. A lot of people think that the carrying capacity of your ranch is just dictated by where you live. There's an aspect of it that is, and that's the maximum amount. The environment that you live in sets the upper limit of productivity. And more than anything else, that is the amount of water that you receive. Now, the length of the growing season, the plant community, the health of the soil all come into play, but the big overriding factor is simply how much water is there. It is your management, though, your day-to-day grazing management, that determines how much of that potential you actually capture. And that's why we can see farms or ranches next door to each other, pretty well the same environment, pretty well the same soil types and all that, but one might have 2 to 3 times higher productivity than another one. That is entirely management. So even though we live in a dry environment, we have great opportunities to increase the overall productivity of our places through making better choices in grazing management. The more effectively we manage our plant community, and in irrigated pastures, this would be how many acres can we keep in phase 2 growth more days of the year. That's what really drives our productivity. On rangeland, it is how much more water can we effectively capture. As we get more pasture rangeland growth out there, we can build organic matter in the soil. We can create more litter on the soil surface, and that is what allows us to capture and hold more water. So building an effective water cycle is built around maintaining vegetative cover, appropriate litter layer on the soil surface, and the way we create that is by balancing use and recovery. We build most of our organic matter below ground during the recovery period. We create our potential litter in the recovery period, but we put that litter on the ground in the grazing period. Ultimate goal is building organic matter. Adding 1% organic matter to the surface 12 inches of your soil increases the water holding capacity by 1 acre inch. That's a substantial amount of water. We want to avoid animal concentration points where animals repeatedly congregate, because that creates compaction, and we want to avoid creating compaction. Number 5, time management matters more than spatial management. When I went to school in the 1970s, what we were basically taught was the best grazing management you could impose was you got this pasture area, you put the appropriate number of animals on that entire area, and you leave them there until it's grazed down to the appropriate residual. Unfortunately, most of your neighbors forgot that last line about taking the animals out when it's grazed an appropriate residual, and they reinterpreted it to mean you leave them in there until it's all gone. And that is what has degraded so much rangeland and pasture land around the country, is we were focused on spatial management, and then everybody forgot the piece about take them out when there's still grass left in there. So why time matters more than space? This grazing cycle, we have a grazing period and we have a recovery period. And the next two slides are, I think, the best explanation I can provide why it's important to use short grazing periods. It's because during the grazing period, mostly negative things are happening to the plant and the soil. What do animals like to eat the most? It's the leaves. Where does photosynthesis take place? In the leaves. What is our primary business as farmers and ranchers? Capturing solar energy to create a saleable product, and to do that, we have to have leaves. So as soon as the animals start grazing in there, the leaves are being taken off, photosynthesis is reduced, and we know that there's a bottom part of the plant too, that the roots get their energy from the top part of the plant. So if we reduce photosynthesis on the top part of the plant, the roots have to contract. Something we didn't know until the last 15 to 20 years is how dependent pasture and range plants are on the microbes in the soil for assisting in the uptake of water, the uptake of nutrients, the protection from various plant and plant pests, what am I trying to say? Diseases, from various microbes that cause diseases, insects that cause damage. In a healthy functioning soil and ecosystem, there's a natural check and balance system that keeps most of those pests under control. For that natural check and balance system to work, the plants above ground have to photosynthesize, send energy to the roots, and then the roots exude nutrients to the microbes, and the microbes, in exchange for that carbohydrate energy, give them phosphorus, zinc, cobalt, copper, boron, array of other nutrients, but also protect them from pests. And that's that direct energy flow to the soil. The only time that soil compaction can occur in a pasture or rangeland is when animals are out there, right? Because the compacting factor is hooves hitting the ground. So that only happens during the grazing period. The positive thing that happens during the grazing period is fertilization. We have dung and urine going back out on the pasture, fertilizing the crop. The shorter we make the grazing period, the sooner we can start the recovery period. The shorter we make the grazing period, the lower the percentage of days during the growing season that the plants aren't being negatively affected. The importance of getting to the recovery period as quickly as possible is because mostly positive things happen during the recovery period. Leaves start growing again, the roots start expanding, we're feeding the microbes again, soil compaction is being broken up, nutrients are being released from the dung. So in the recovery period, positive things are happening. And that's why we want to have as many days of the active growing season as possible in recovery periods rather than in grazing periods. This graph on the bottom, we have increasing number of pastures, and then on the vertical, it's percent of the days that the pasture is being rested. And if recovery is the main thing we're thinking about, this graph tells us that we only need 10 pastures to get 90% of the recovery benefit. So why do we make 20, 30, 40, 100, 150, 300 pastures? Because there's other valuable things that you gain from shorter grazing periods. More consistency and utilization across the landscape, the grazing of less desirable plants, more manure, more even manure distribution, They're more likely to eat weeds, greater ability to ration out feed and manage the protein energy balance in the rumen in the wintertime, a whole lot of other stuff. And ultimately, that all leads to higher carrying capacity, which brings us back to our first point, that carrying capacity is one of the primary determinants of profitability, because carrying capacity is what drives your revenue stream. Overstocking and overgrazing, are they the same thing? No, they are not. Overstocking is a ranch-wide issue, and it happens when your stocking rate exceeds your carrying capacity. The only way, there's two ways you fix that problem. One is you destock, you get rid of animals. The other one is you buy in feed to support that higher number of animals. The first one will usually help you stay in a profitable picture. The second one, trying to feed your way through an overstock situation, almost will never pay. It just puts you in a deeper and deeper hole. Overgrazing, on the other hand, happens one plant at a time. And it's when the animals graze a plant that is in a negative carbohydrate balance. And there's two ways that that happens. Overgrazing very often happens on understocked properties. Two ways that overgrazing happens is you leave animals on the same pasture for too long. It's been grazed, it's trying to regrow, the animals bite it off again, and if they do that repeatedly, they will diminish that pasture. The other one is you took the animals away, thought you were going to let it recover, but then you can't come back too soon. It's either staying too long or coming back too soon. You know what that makes it? It makes it a function of time. It isn't a function of too many animal numbers. It's not effectively managing time. And so, in our view, managing time is infinitely more important than managing space on the ranch. This is more of a Alabama picture, but it's still in there. So that kind of yellowy, orangey colored plant you see there is a very, very low quality native warm season grass called broom sedge. Andropogon virginicus, if you want to know specifically. It is in the same family as big bluestem, sand bluestem, and the native tall prairie grasses that are very, very desirable grasses. This one is not. The general perspective of most people in the southeastern third of the country is that it's completely worthless and animals will never eat it. So our son Ian, and some of you know Ian, he's a PCC bull co-op producer down in Texas. He was managing a place in the Missouri Ozarks in 2011 and 2012. And this is following the 2011 drought, which at West Plains, Missouri, was the lowest precipitation year since they started keeping records in 1870. He had a little bit of fescue that grew up in there, so it was green feed, high protein. He's putting 600 cows on 8 acres for a day. Yesterday morning, that right-hand strip looked just like the left side of the fence. The cows have moved back. You can see their golden strip there. Tomorrow, they'll be on the left-hand side of the fence there. And 24 hours later, it's going to look just like that. A completely worthless grass that they will never eat unless you decide to manage time instead of space. Focus on what you can control. 4 necessary ingredients for making meat, milk, and fiber. Those are carbon dioxide, solar energy, water, and soil minerals. Every day out on our pastures and rangeland, we can make decisions, we can make choices that will improve our productivity, our carrying capacity, our individual animal performance if we are focused on managing those resources. And we do that by understanding and managing solar energy flow, the water cycle, mineral cycles, and plant community dynamics or biodiversity. Those are things we can control and manage. We can't control the price of oil, the price of fuel, the price of steel. To an extent, we can manage the cost of labor, but only at a very local scale. Those are things that are beyond our control. The weather is beyond our control. Focus on what you can manage. As I said, we do need the right animal to be that factory. We talked about functional animal types. Now I want you to think about cows as employees on the ranch. We have way too many outfits where the rancher is working for the cows. It's supposed to be the other way around. We're the managers, they're the employees. If you have 100 cows, you have 100 employees. If you had a business in town with 100 employees, you would probably have something that we call position descriptions. Position descriptions describe what is the job of the employee. Now, most of you probably recognize that cows can't read. So obviously, the cow is not reading the position description to understand what she's supposed to be doing. We, as the managers, need to review the position descriptions so we know what our employees are supposed to be doing. So if you were going to write a position description for a cow, what kind of things would you put in there? Just shout them out, let me know.
No time off.
What?
No time off.
No time off? Man, he is a harsh manager. Anybody else have anything else to contribute besides that? Bring in a live calf every year. That's a good one to be in there. How is she going to get that live calf on the ground? Do it herself. Deliver a live calf every year. What else does she need to do?
Harvest grass.
Harvest grass. She needs to feed herself. What else? Oh, I can think of some things. And I was going to change this slide, Kit, and I forgot. Rustle her own grub. Find the best bite of feed she can. Deliver a live calf every 12 months. Bring a live calf to the weaning pen. She needs to stay healthy without a lot of fuss. That's why you want to buy 5-star fly-resistant bulls tomorrow. And parasite tolerance. If we were, you know what the big thing to sell in Alabama is? It's those heat-tolerant bulls. You need a cold-tolerant bull here. But, genetically, we can do a lot with that cow to help her stay healthy. We don't need drugs and stuff. How about mow weeds, fertilize pastures, plant seeds, till ground? You can take a cow, and if you decide to manage them to accomplish any of those objectives, you can do it. You just have to understand the tools she has available to accomplish that. And then one of the critically important ones is come to work every day with a positive attitude. All right. So, that's the employee's job. What is it that the manager is supposed to do? Is it the role of a manager to step in front of an employee and do its job? No. And that's what we do when we keep mowing hay and hauling hay out there and babysitting her and pulling calves out. We are stepping in her way and doing her job for her. What a manager's role is, and this is, in my view, true in any business, manufacturing, services, retail sales, the role of the manager is to create a working environment where your employees can thrive. Our job on the ranch is create a working environment where that cow can be the very best cow that she can be. I never saw a cow knock down a fence and set it back up. Now, I will admit that. So we have a job of maintaining ranch infrastructure. We also have the job of marketing ranch products. This is a job that a lot of ranchers hate. It's so easy to just throw the calves on a trailer, take them to the sale barn. We can argue all night which is the better avenue, to 45-day wean them and try to market them effectively, or just throw them in the trailer. We're not going to go down that path. And then we have to plan, because a cow never plans for there to be feed available in the winter for her to graze. She expects you're going to carry her a bale of hay. So if you don't want to have to carry her a bale of hay and you want her to harvest her own feed in the winter, you better have planned for that. And if that plan didn't work, let's plan for next winter and adapt a new one. Some of you saw this not very long ago in the newsletter, I believe, or something very similar to it. It's how many calves does it take? And we're looking at, as a reference point, 1973. Why 1973? Because in consumer buying power, in inflation-adjusted dollars, that peak cattle price we had in 1973 is still the highest cattle price we have ever had in America. Today's price, or I should, because the price has been trending down, you know, when we hit that $189 fed cattle a couple of weeks ago, in inflation-adjusted dollars, that highest beef price we've ever had was 55% of what the value of a calf was in 1973. That's why things don't work the way they used to. So in 1973, to pay a cowboy's wage or salary, it took 21 calves. To buy a 3/4 ton four-wheel drive pickup took 20 calves. To fully furnish the cowboy, you know, saddle, whatever went in there, it was 52 calves to maintain a cowboy in your employment in 1973. 2022, because we're not through 2023 yet, if we were using the 2023 numbers, this number of calves would be somewhat lower, but not back to what it was in 1973 by any means. So to pay the cowboy's wage today, 49 calves. To buy the pickup truck, 71 calves. Now here's something I want you to note. In 1973, the cowboy's wage and the cost of his truck were essentially the same. 2022, you see the cost of that truck has gone way up more, has gone up way more than the cowboy's salary did. That's why you guys all drive used trucks. Now, to fully equip that cowboy, 138 calves. And we're not talking about just the profit from a calf or the gross margin from the calf. We're talking the full value of that calf is what it takes to pay those things. Things don't work the way they used to. In ranching for profit, they talk about 3 keys to profitability: improved gross margin, and what I've learned over all these years, the fastest way to increase gross margin, which remember is the difference between the value of your product and the operating cost to produce it, the fastest way to increase gross margin is work with nature, not against nature. If you turn Mother Nature into your business partner, she's going to save you a lot of money. If you keep her as an adversary, she's going to cost you a lot of money. And she has very, very deep pockets. Reduce overheads. I see all across the country overcapitalization in equipment and facilities as one of the biggest killers of ranch profitability. It takes, and then accelerate turnover rate. And that's where Bud Williams would tell you, that's just a gross margin reminder. So we go back to Bert Teichert's second key to profitability was more grazed days and fewer fed days. And you know, this comparison here just shows you why it's cheaper to graze than it is to make hay. So a year ago, so last winter, y'all remember hay prices got pretty high. And there's, you know, several ranches, client ranches through the region that I check with to see what their costs are running. And whereas, say, 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, the typical cost differential between a day of grazing and a day of hay feeding was about $1, $1.10 per day. It would cost you $1 to $1.10 more to feed a cow each day than grazing. Last winter, it was running $1.70 to $2.10 was the cost differential between grazing and feeding hay. What pays for that equipment is animal product, unless you're in the hay business selling hay off your property. But if you are actually in the livestock business and you're making hay to feed for your livestock, the only thing that can pay for equipment is animal product. How many cows does it take to justify a baler, a swather, all that? What I have figured in those analytics, to justify owning a new swather, rake, baler, and some kind of bale transportation, it takes 600 cows to justify owning that hay equipment. Now, we can go, that's new. We can go buy good quality used equipment, and it'll get down to $400, $450. It's what it takes to justify owning equipment. I bet some of your neighbors have 85 cows, 110 cows, and they own all that equipment. It doesn't work. I like using these 3 states. They all start with M, and literally that is just a strut. You know, it comes right down to the center of the U.S. From the Canadian border. Missouri's the Garden of Eden of grazing in my book, all the way down to Mississippi, where a cold day in the winter is 50 degrees and the grass never stops growing. But they all feed the same amount of hay. It makes no sense. You know why they do that? Because we feed hay to the extent that we can make hay. And when they made hay making so easy, and I ask this at every meeting I do this, to try to find some old person who remembers this. And down in Alabama, there was a guy, probably late 30s, that knew the answer to this question. What was Vermeer's marketing slogan in the 1970s? Anybody remember?
One-man hay system.
The one-man hay system. We went from requiring, 3 families getting together, 22 kids, 85 horses, and time and lots of time to put up hay to the one-man hay system. We made it so easy, everybody wanted to do it. Now, in 1973, and remember 1973, that's the highest cattle price we've ever had. My dad bought one of the first 605C balers in the state of Illinois. That's an F there, not a C. And we paid $4,200 for it. And we had that all-time fed cattle price of $54. So that's our point of reference. Anybody else remember what happened in 1973? First Arab oil embargo. The housewife's beef boycott. President Nixon capped the price of beef, stopped all beef exports out of this country. That's what 1973 was about. Anybody remember what the price of fed cattle was in July of 1974? 19 cents. That's what happens when the government tries to control the market. That is, to this day, the steepest 12-month drop we have ever seen in the cattle cycle. That's our point of reference. 2014, all-time record high beef price, got all the way up to 178. In that year, the 605M baler would have cost you about $40,000. 2023, all-time record high beef price, 189. It might say 185 there, I'm not sure. Yeah, I didn't update the slide to that 189. That $4 isn't going to make a lot of difference. A used big square baler, 140,000 bucks maybe. The new Vermeer baler, 65,000. Let's put these things comparatively side by side. 1973 to 2023, big round baler, $4,200 versus $65,000. 1,500% increase in price over 50 years. Diesel fuel from 17 cents a gallon to $4.25. Now it's fallen down here later in the year a little bit. 2,500% increase over 50 years. Farm labor, 73, $1.50 an hour, 1662, and some people have questioned that. That's what the Bureau of Labor Statistics says on their website the average farm labor wage in 2023 is. A lot of people don't get that. Nitrogen fertilizer, 9 cents a pound versus 81 cents a pound. Okay. Now if you look at the income that we might earn, when we started doing custom baling in 1973 with that big round baler, we charged $6 a bale. In 2022, the average custom baling rate for a large round bale in the U.S. was $14. That's I got the glare there, 133% increase. And then we compare that record cattle prices, 54 hundredweight to 185, 343% increase. I think I may have actually misfigured that. I think it's 253. All right, so we have this thing called inflation. And if we compare it from inflation, this is what, in the far right-hand column, that's what things should cost and the prices that we should be receiving if the only thing that was happening was the general rate of inflation across the economy. What we have seen is inputs have inflated way beyond the general inflation rate, and the value of our products have not begun to keep up with inflation. So that baler should really only cost about $24,000. Diesel fuel should be 97 cents. Farm labor, $8.57. Fertilizer, 51 cents. That guy baling hay for you, you ought to be paying him $34 a bale. How many of you would be willing to pay somebody to bale up, you know, like a 1,500-pound big round bale and pay them $34 to do it? I don't think very many people would do that. And there in red, you see what the price of fed cattle should be today if we were only keeping up with inflation. $308. And we got so excited at $189. This is why a business model built on cheap land, cheap oil, cheap iron doesn't work today, because none of that stuff is cheap, and all of our stuff costs more than it used to do. And the seventh one here is, I will have no fear of wasting grass. And you say, what does that mean? All right, ladies and gentlemen, the moment of truth has come. You thought you were simply coming to the PCC pre-sale event featuring Jim Gerrish. Where you have actually come is a covert meeting of Overgrazers Anonymous. All of us in our lives have been guilty. I mean, if you run cattle, I'm willing to bet that at some point you've overgrazed your pastures. And he said, boy, I'm not going to do that again. And yet, you do it again. Say, no, I'm not going to do this. And you do it again. And then finally, we bring you to rehab. And in rehab, we're all here to support one another, to try to get beyond this perilous addiction that we have of overgrazing our land. And one of the things we do together is we support one another by reciting the mantras. And so the first mantra of Overgrazing Anonymous is this one here. It takes grass to grow grass. And so to support your fellow ranchers, these members of the PCC family, all of us here together, let's say this together. It takes grass to grow grass. Come on. I know everybody's worn out, it's late in the day, but I'm still enthusiastic about this. Come on. It takes grass. That's much better, thank you. The second mantra, grass feeds the grass, grass feeds the soil, then grass can feed the livestock. If you go out there and all you're thinking is, I gotta feed the cows, gotta feed the cows, gotta feed the cows, you will run out of grass. You will overgraze. You will backslide. But if you go out there thinking about taking care of the grass first and understanding how that builds the soil, then the cattle just about come along for a free ride. So let's do it. Excellent, thank you. The fear of wasting grass. A lot of your neighbors are guilty of this. They've gone out to the pasture thinking they're going to move the cows. They get there and they see the cows are standing ankle deep in grass. And they say, oh, I don't want to waste that grass. I'm going to leave them there another day. Now, if you move them when they were ankle deep in grass, we end up with something like that. That grass is 4 to 5 inches tall. And started about like that. We leave it 4 to 5 inches tall. We have a lot of green leaf. That green leaf can capture solar energy, restart the plant regrowing with either no or minimal draw on stored carbohydrates. We're keeping the soil covered, so we're keeping it cooler, so we're not evaporating water out. If we allow the soil to get too hot, all the beneficial microbial processes start breaking down, and detrimental ones accelerate. And because the highest quality in the plant is in the upper part of the plant, if we only ask the animals to eat this much, they're going to perform better because it's more nutritious. So leaving a pasture looking like that, good for the plants, good for the soil, good for the livestock. If we decide, not we wouldn't do this, but if your neighbor decides to leave them another day and take it down to this point, what has happened? Where's the green leaf? It's gone. This is now going to have to regrow from stored carbohydrates, and that is always a slower recovery process than if it's coming from active photosynthesis. We have more direct sunlight hitting the soil, so the soil temperature is heating up. We're evaporating water out, and we're stopping the good microbial processes. And because we've asked the animals to graze down deeper into there, they've taken less digestible material, lower protein material, and their performance is going to go down. Leaving the pasture like that is bad for the plants, bad for the soil, bad for the livestock. That's what we call a lose-lose-lose situation. And that brings us to the final mantra of, I will have no fear of wasting grass. So let's do that. I will have no fear of wasting grass. Excellent. Thank you. And guess what? Every presentation ends with a book ad. A couple of people have already told me, hey, I got all your books. I know who you are. I said, well, great. I thank you for that. But if you don't have them, I'd love to hook you up. Thank you very much.